Hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I'm Saudamini, an intern at Animal Ethics India. Today, 10th of December, is marked as Animal Rights Day. Animal rights advocates around the world seek to persuade people that kindness and respect are owed to all sentient beings. This, of course, includes animals. It is important to believe that animals too have rights. Most people understand that animals can feel pain. Many also believe that animals can feel and perceive feelings. It is these reasons that make animal rights an important part for the society to be aware about and to understand. Animal Ethics is participating on this occasion through hosting an Ask Me Anything session in three different languages: Portuguese, English, and Spanish. We had earlier posted on a form on all our social networking sites inviting people to ask their queries regarding wild animal sufferings and topics related to animal ethics. We have chosen a few questions that we shall explore today. We also have with us today Aditya, who is the coordinator for animal ethics in India. Hi Aditya, how are you?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm good.
Cool. So I think we can begin the session with some amazing questions by our audience. So the first question was, what is speciesism? What are the different types of speciesism? What does it mean to give moral consideration to animals in practical terms? Yeah, I think there's a lot about this in on a site. So, but still, if you could tell us in brief, that'd be good.
Great. As Sodamini mentioned, there's much in-depth information about this on our website, so I'd highly recommend you check that out. But to give you a brief introduction about what is speciesism, it is essentially a form of discrimination that is based on the individual species membership. So it is similar to racism and sexism in such that where individuals are discriminated based on arbitrary factors, uh, where, for example, based on their gender or their race, which are unjustified criteria to discriminate against individuals with. So speciesism is this form of discrimination where we discriminate against non-human animals based on which species they're born into. And yeah, there are different forms of speciesism. One of the most commonly held forms of speciesism is called as anthropocentrism, which is the belief that human interests count for more than that of non-human animals. Uh, uh, this can take many forms. For example, where we disregard their interests, disregard the interests of animals involved in the food industry, where animals are killed for food or for clothing or for entertainment. So all of these come under the category of anthropocentrism. And it is not just discriminating between humans and non-human animals. Speciesism also involves discriminating against two different species of animals. This can be based on how closely they are related to humans, for example, considering the interests of dogs as opposed to a pig or a fish. And similarly, it could also be based on how much we find them aesthetically pleasing, for example, valuing the interests of a panda as opposed to a black bear in India, which is usually considered as a pest which destroys the crops. So yeah, like valuing the interests of a panda as opposed to a black bear could also be form of speciesism. Moving on, it could also be based on the scientific interest that we have towards that particular species. For example, where we value endangered animals or keystone species more. For example, we value a tiger as opposed to animals that we label as pests or vermin. For example, wild boars or rats, where we do not consider their interests and we justify harming them because they are not scientifically valuable or because we find them ugly. Um, yeah, and there's also another form of speciesism which is based on the size of an animal, uh, because we find it easier to relate to or understand an animal that is larger in size. We find it we are more prone to give moral consideration to animals that are larger in size, for example, like an elephant, as opposed to smaller animals like invertebrates, butterflies, honeybees, or animals that are smaller in size, whom we find it hard to relate with. But these animals constitute the majority of individuals among non-human animals. But just because of their size, we disregard their interest. So this is also a form of speciesism. And yeah, so these are some forms of speciesism. If you're interested in learning more about these different forms of speciesism, I'd highly recommend you to check out our website or our video course where we examine these forms in much more depth.
Yeah, there's a
Um,
lot. There's a lot of it. So, uh, yeah. So maybe going to the next question. Um, it's a kind of follow-up question, maybe. Like, is being vegan enough to be anti-speciesist?
yeah, that's also an interesting question. The second part of the earlier question, which where the person was asking about what does it mean to give moral consideration to animals in practical terms. So when I talk about moral consideration, it essentially means that I am taking into consideration how my beliefs, actions, or behavior affects another individual. So that is what we mean by giving moral consideration or extending moral consideration to another person or another individual. So usually in the animal rights in the international animal rights scene, when we talk about animal rights, we focus exclusively on becoming vegan. But I would argue that when we reject speciesism, we are not just against harming animals, but we are also actively in favor of helping them whenever possible, or whenever they are suffering, or when they are in pain, irrespective of what is causing the suffering, whether it is human caused or whether it is due to natural reasons. So when we reject speciesism, it's not just that we go vegan, but we are also actively in favor of helping animals that are suffering due to natural causes, whether it is a natural disaster, whether it is due to diseases or other natural causes, um, or also when they are anthropogenic causes, or for example, due to fishing, or due to other indirect anthropogenic causes as well. So yeah, I would say that when we reject speciesism, we also care about wild animal suffering along with being vegan. Yeah, so that's how I would answer the question.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, moving on to the next question. How can we get people to care about wild animal suffering when most people aren't even vegan and when so many people live in such precarity? Along the same lines, how do we justify spending money on wild animal suffering endeavors, some of whose success is in such a doubt, when there are other causes that we know for certain can elevate the suffering of humans if that money was spent on them? So, what are your thoughts about this question?
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. And to first answer the first part of your question, which is how can we get people to care about wild animal suffering when most people aren't vegan? Um, I would say that focusing on anti-speciesist advocacy, as well as promoting a field of welfare biology, could be highly useful tools in helping people extend moral consideration to non-human animals. And investing in this field of welfare biology will also allow us to support measures to assist the animals that are suffering in the wild. Most people already hold beliefs that it is wrong to cause suffering to sentient beings. But due to prevalent speciesist biases, there is partiality in which sentient beings are given moral consideration, as I explained in the previous questions. So, um, among potential solutions, I would say that working alongside other animal advocacy organizations in raising awareness about arguments against speciesism, we can help raise concern for all sentient beings, including the wild animals. So, yeah, this is what I would say would be the answer to the first part of your question. Coming to the next part, which is how can we justify spending money on wild animal suffering endeavors? Um, so it's not like we are not already helping animals in the wild. There are a lot of interventions already being done to help animals in the wild. For example, vaccinating animals against diseases, helping them during natural disasters, where we do see that we do observe that animals are actually benefited through these interventions. Um, and yes, there is definitely uncertainty involved with respect to what is the total net impact of these interventions on the different species that exist in that particular area. So to to gain more certainty on these issues, we 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 suggest investing more resources into building the field of welfare biology, which will allow us to research about more robust ways of helping animals in the wild in the long term, which is on margin, I would argue, is more effective use of money. Um, yes, and when you compare it with human causes, I would say that wild animal suffering is much more neglected area and severely underfunded as well. There's very few organizations working on this area of wild animal suffering, which are animal ethics, rethink priorities, and wild animal initiative. So there are very few organizations working on this issue, and also if you consider the scale of the suffering that is present in the wild, the total number of animals that are estimated to exist in the wild is said to be around 10 to the power 19 to 10 to the power 21. If you include the invertebrates, it's much higher. And also, if you include the long-term future, the total number of animals that will come to exist in the wild is very, very huge. So, if you consider the total amount of suffering, because uh, yeah, also if you consider the reproductive strategies that are prevalent in the wild, where uh, a parent gives birth to a huge number of offsprings, out of which very few end up surviving, and most of the animals that come into existence live a very short and painful lives. So, taking all of this into consideration, the total amount of suffering in the wild is astronomical. So, yes, given all these reasons, I think it is very, very important that we need to uh, take this cause area much more seriously, and we need to invest more resources into uh, finding more effective ways of helping animals in the wild and getting more certainty about the impact that these interventions have on the lives of these animals. So yeah, that's how I think yeah, we can make more progress on this area.
Yeah, I guess, like you said, like funding research might be one good thing, because it might decrease the uncertainty around whatever uh, um, whatever problem we are facing. So it is going to reduce the uncertainty around it. So that could be one good way.
Exactly. Yeah. And it would, yeah, like the value of information right now is pretty high in this cause area. So, funding more research might not only help us get more information and knowledge about how to help animals, but it might also help to generate more support from the public and the policymakers towards assisting animals that are suffering in the wild.
Yeah, yes, I think that's one good thing to think about. And going to the next question, it is like, what solution do you propose to the damage that invasive species cause to the ecosystem? So this is about invasive species.
Right. Yeah. So when we look at this term invasive species, that's this term is usually used by conservationists to label animals that are not native to a particular area and which usually compete uh, for resources with the native species. So I would say there is no reason to disregard the interests of the members of the species that do not belong to a particular species just because they do not belong to that particular area. When we reject speciesism, or we need to take their interest into consideration as well. And uh, usually, the solutions used to uh, the solutions that are implemented to solve the problem when invasive species enter a particular area is usually using lethal methods to kill them or to harm them in very painful ways to remove them from that particular area. But as I said, when we reject speciesism and when we take their interests into consideration seriously, we would try to find solutions that minimize the harm that both the native species and the invasive species undergo, and we would try to find non-lethal solutions to this. And some of these solutions can include fertility control of the species that don't belong to that particular area, or it could also include relocation of these invasive species back to the territory that they are originally from, or where they don't affect that particular ecosystem. It could also include careful population management or environmental management of that area to make sure that the harm caused by these species that are not native of that area cause the least harm possible. So yeah, these are some measures I think that we can implement. And I think most importantly, it is important to communicate these uh, solutions that minimize the harm to the conservationists working in this area, so that we can convince them or persuade them to uh, align to more ethical ways of mitigating this conflict rather than just disregarding their interests and resorting to lethal ways of solving this problem.
Yeah, in one way, when we say that invasive species are damaging the environment, so there should be an awareness about how humans are also damaging. Like humans also equally damage the ecosystem and species. Yet we don't really propose them as propose humans, like harming the humans. Like you said, when we are trying to get rid of invasive species, first thing we do is either to try to completely eradicate them, or lethally harm them so that they are removed. But we don't propose the same when we talk about humans. So maybe there should be a morally different way to tackle the problem. That could be one thing to work upon.
Exactly. Yeah, as you said, humans are probably the most invasive species that cause a huge amount of destruction and suffering to non-human animals, but we would never consider uh, harming them as a solution to solve this problem. In fact, we would find ways of respecting the interests of both humans as well as the native species, and trying to find ways of solving this problem with as much harm as possible. And yeah, I completely agree with what you said, which is we need to try to minimize the harm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think. Okay. Maybe we can go to the next question. How do we respond to
Mhm.
the argument that non-human animals would suffer less than humans, both physiologically and psychologically? How do you respond?
Hmm. Yeah, this is a very interesting question, but it's also a very common question. There's usually this implicit assumption that all non-human animals suffer less than humans. Um, but I don't think there's any conclusive evidence to prove that non-human animals suffer less than humans, because
Yes.
different species have different physiological and psychological capacities. Um, and there's also this assumption that with an increase in the complexity of the brain, there is also an increase in the intensity of pain that an individual can suffer or can experience. Um, but that's not necessarily true. Uh, it need not be the case that with increased complexity, the intensity of the experiences also increase. Um, there needs to be more research on the area, and there is no conclusive evidence of that. And most most non-human animals are sentient, and they have an interest in not being harmed. And the same reason entails that animals have an interest in having their suffering prevented and also their positive well-being promoted. Even if they did have lower capacity to suffer than humans, that is not a justification to disregard their interests, just as we would not disregard the interests of a human who had lower capacity to suffer. Um, yeah, and also if we did believe that a hen, for example, had a lower capacity to suffer than a human, for example, um, if you look at the aggregate amount of suffering that will exist, uh, or the number of animals that are harmed by humans, uh, it's estimated that every year humans harm trillions of animals if you include the fishes as well as the invertebrates that are exploited by humans. So the total amount of suffering is so huge, and if you also include the suffering of wild animals, the number is astronomical. So taking all of this into consideration, the the concern, this issue is much more serious, and we need to give much more concern to the suffering of non-human animals, even if you did believe that they suffer less than humans. Um, Another argument that I would say is that it is also possible that some species of animals, like the invertebrates, experience time much faster. So for example, a single second of pain for a human, a fly, might be much more intense than for a human, because a fly, for example, experiences time much more faster. And also that, for example, we humans, we are aware that when we burn our hand, maybe after some treatment and after some time, we might recover from the pain. But for a house fly or an animal that is undergoing pain, it might not have, they might not have the awareness that the pain will stop after a few moments. So in that moment, for them, that pain is much more intense, because they don't have the awareness of the cessation of that pain after a few after a duration of time. So given all these considerations, I think it is not reasonable to assume that that non-human animals suffer less
Suffer
than
less. Yeah.
humans. And as I said, even if they did, that would not be a justification to disregard their interests.
Yeah, true. Yes, because it's everybody that is facing suffering in life. So, okay, we can go to the next question.
Yeah,
Some people say that cats are to be blamed for the extinction of species, of some species. I don't agree that cats are more to be blamed for the extinction of animals than humans. Am I reasoning wrong? Am I a speciesist for defending cats and not their prey? So this is the question.
yeah, that's a controversial question, because yeah, cats. I mean, in one of the studies that I read, it was estimated that the outdoor cats in US alone are estimated to be responsible for around 2.4 billion bird deaths. So that is definitely a huge number, and the amount of suffering that would be caused by them hunting the birds is also huge. But I completely agree with you that we cannot really hold cats morally culpable for hunting their prey, because that is something which is instinctive to them, and they do not have uh, moral agency to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Whereas humans can definitely be held morally culpable, because we are consciously disregarding the interests of non-human animals and actively harming them for for purposes which are not necessary. So yeah, I would I would say that definitely they are not they cannot be held blameworthy. But at the same time, I think when we are trying to find a solution to this problem, we should consider the interests of both the cats as well as the animals that are killed by the cats, uh, which would mean that we take into consideration how the animals that are killed by the cats are affected by the hunting, as well as the interest of the cat in fulfilling their nutrition. So this could involve many different measures. For example, you could adopt outdoor cats and put them indoors, and and also maybe get them neutered. Um, Another potential area to explore is probably vegan cat food, which has been recently shown to be nutritionally adequate for optimal health of cats. So that's probably another could be one of the solutions there. Um,
It
yes.
could be.
So yeah, these are some of the things that I think we could undergo. So Damini, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, like I think in some cases, like when we tie bells around the cat's neck, it's like when it makes the noise while moving. So the noise is the thing that can scare away its prey, or we get to know that there is something, the cat is up to something, so we can just try to prevent it. That could be one way, traditional way probably.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's actually a good idea of tying a bell to a cat, which would probably alert the animals that a cat is planning to hunt, or the cat, which would potentially decrease the total number of animals that are harmed by the cats. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with this we're up to the last question. So the question goes like, how is long-termism related to wild animal suffering?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. So when we talk about long-termism, we essentially mean that we are also taking into consideration the beings that might come into existence in the future, not just the beings that are present right now. So we are taking into consideration the interests of the beings that will come into existence in the future.
Future.
So exactly. So when we talk about wild animal suffering, it's not just the animals that are suffering currently. There would be many more sentient beings that will come into existence in the future. If you consider the next 100 or 1,000 years, the total number of sentient beings in the wild will be much, much higher. And by investing in building this field of welfare, sorry, by building this field of welfare biology right now and building more support among the public to support interventions of assisting animals in the wild, we also would be positively affecting the lives of the animals that will come into existence in the future. And it's not just the biological non-human animals. When we talk about sentient beings, there's also a possibility that humans design these artificial entities that are sentient, that do have the capacity to suffer or have positive experiences, and they show both behaviorally as well as physiologically the criteria necessary to be sentient. Then it would also be our duty to extend moral consideration to these artificial sentient beings and take their interest into consideration as well. So yeah, when we talk about long-term future, we might not know, there might be artificial entities or robots that are sentient as well. So by raising concern against speciesism, and by raising concern for all sentient beings, we are in essence also positively affecting the lives of all these entities, the sentient beings that might come into existence in the future. So yeah, that's one of the strong arguments, I think, because as I said, the number of sentient beings that will come into existence is so huge. So anything that we do right now to uh, raise concern for these beings and bring them into a moral consideration will be very, very highly impactful. That's what I believe.
Yeah,
I
that
hope
makes
that answers your
sense.
question. Yeah.
Yes, of course it does. Yeah, I think with that, we have answered all the questions thoroughly. So, on the occasion of Animal Rights Day, I'm really happy to have had more awareness about animal rights. Hope our viewers too have taken home some good points. And viewers, if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us on the social networking sites, or you may email us on our website info@animalethics.org. Please ask us anything related to animal rights and animal ethics. We'll be happy to answer. So maybe on that note, I thank Aditya for joining us today, and all the audience for their interest in our occasion. Thank you. Have a good
Thank
day.
you, Swadamini, for hosting it. Bye, guys.
Bye.